Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I believe, so I'm Paul Brown, Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. And I'm joined today by Rob Ballinder, who's also a Technical Advisor for City and Guilds for Building Services. And then Mark Jones, who's the EAL EQA Manager, who's going to deliver the first few slides. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Can you click on the next slide for me, please, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, as Paul just introduced us, we'll move on to this this slide here. I'm Mark Jones, and we've got Rob Melander on the call as well as Paul Brown. So the first slide then that we're going to have a talk through is how do T levels compare? So as you can see there on the screen, we've got the A levels on the left hand side, and then the T levels in the middle, and then the apprenticeship at the far side. So T levels are a sort of a central part in between the A levels and the apprenticeship level, which is a 2-year technical programme at local colleges, training centres that want to deliver the qualification. So the T levels are 80% classroom based and 20% in placement doing practical training, whereas the apprenticeship is 80% on the job and 20% off the job in colleges doing the studying. So that's the main sort of difference there. Okay, Rob, do you want to go on to the next slide? Sorry, Paul. So how is a T level different from the apprenticeship? So the T levels and the apprenticeships are based on the same employer design standards, but will be different learning styles for learners. As we've previously said there's 20% practical in the T levels and 80% studying theory-wise, and vice versa for the apprenticeship scheme. The apprenticeship schemes are paid work, so the learners are employed doing the apprenticeship by an employer, and are suitable for learners who know what occupation they want to pursue. T levels are largely classroom based, so it offers a broader course content. Students will specialise later in the programme, so they can be studying across a 1 or 2 different trade areas before they make the final decision later on to join an apprenticeship. The T level is a new gold standard in technical education and technical course of choice for learners in the future. To move on, Paul. Thank you. So here we've got the structure of the T levels programme there. So overall, it's around 1,800 hours over 2 years of study for the learners. Learners will need to achieve all elements to achieve the T level certificate. So as you can see there, we've got the boxes with core component, occupational specialism component, the T level industry placement and other requirements, and then obviously employability, enrichment and pastoral requirements in there. So the core component, which is knowledge and understanding of the concepts, theories and principles relevant to the T levels and the broader roles. So that gives you sort of the learner the background of the construction and building services industry. The core skills are relevant to the T level in question, so they're relevant to that particular trade areas. They're assessed through an external examination and a substantial employer set external set project, which is carried out at the centre. The occupational specialisms, knowledge and skills and behaviours required to achieve the threshold competence in an occupational specialism. So they will be doing maths, they'll be doing English and digital skills. And again, students must complete at least 1 occupational specialism, as we'll see as we go on to the further slides in a few minutes. the difference between the choices that learners have got. The T-level industry placements undertaken in an employer setting, minimum of 45 days between 315 and 420 hours. Students will develop technical skills and apply their knowledge in a workplace environment within the employer. And the provider should pay, contribute to travel and subsistence costs if not covered by the employer. So that's something that you will need to discuss with employers that you've got partaking in this particular qualification. And then at the far right, then we've got other requirements. T-level panels may be set occupation-specific requirements if they're essential for skilled employment, example, a license to practice qualification or a professional qualification. So there we have the sort of sections of the T-level qualification. You move on to the next slide, please, Paul. So the T-level program, as we've mentioned, it shows there over the 2 years, 80% technical qualification training, which consists of the core, the English and maths, and the digital requirements, and then the occupational specialism and the other requirements as mentioned in the previous slide there. The 20%, which is the practical side, industry placement, technical skills and knowledge the learners will be developing as they work in employers' premises. So they'll be learning about health and safety, what the employer does, how to go about things in the working environment, and developing some practical skills that will be set along the way. And it'll be a meaningful contribution in the workplace. So there won't be stand and watch and hand tools type role. It'll be meaningful engagement and doing things. Okay, if you move on to the next slide, Paul. Okay, so construction and building services then. If you sign up for the T-level information, and that's on the City and Guilds site, which is indicated there. You'll get the latest updates and the information on the qualifications. Okay, if you want to move on. In the development of the qualification, this has been developed by people in the industry and education. As you can see there, there's some major employers there that have engaged within the building services and construction sector. For information there's Balfour Beatty, NG Bailey's, Permission Homes, Rose, various types of big employers who are obviously valuing the contribution of the qualification within the workplace. Okay, if you can move on. So the building services core gives you, well, the building service and the construction, there are options for the learners what they register on. So for the building services for the core, then to achieve the T-level technical qualification there, need to complete the two components of the technical qualification. These are known as the core components and the occupational specialism. You'll have the choice of studying one standalone occupational specialism or a combination of specialisms as detailed below. So as you can see there, so Group A are the standalone occupational specialisms. So you've got the electrical engineering, electrical and electronic equipment engineering, protection systems engineering and gas engineering. So they're the standalone ones. And then you've got the combination ones, which are sort of self-explanatory there. Plumbing and engineering linked in with heating engineering and ventilation, and refrigeration engineering and air conditioning. So they're the ones that you can do as a dual entry. Okay, Paul, thanks for that. If I can hand over to you now for the construction.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Thanks for that. So, guys, just to kind of give an overview of the on-site construction T-level. So, just like the building services, there is a core aspect to the T-level qualification itself. That consists of two parts. Basically, there's 2 exam papers within that and an ESP and employer set project. The core kind of content covers subjects such as health and safety, which you would expect, no doubt, obviously, but stuff like scientific principles and the built environment, the industry in general in terms of the built environment, construction management for on-site, design and technology, and other kind of topics of that nature. But you can see the details of those in the handbooks. But in terms of the T-level, then all the candidates would do the core, and then they would then specialise in either carpentry and joinery, plastering, painting and decorating, or bricklaying. So obviously it's a 2-year programme, so in the first year they would be taught the core content as well as working towards and on whichever occupational specialism they had chosen to do. So if it was carpentry and joinery, they would be doing the core. In tandem with that, they would actually be teaching the skills and knowledge around the carpentry and joinery content, what we call the occupational specialism. So details again about what each occupational specialism contains are in the handbook. So that's your Bible, and that's on our web page. One thing to point out, as you can see there, so for on-site construction, it's the 8711, and for building services, it's the 8710, as you can see on the slide. So just looking at the on-site in the first instance. So what you would need to do, you must register on the core in the first instance in both cases for construction, on-site and building services. So that's the 871130 for on-site and the 871030 for building services. So that must be your first point of registration, must register on the core first. Before you then actually register on whichever occupational specialism the particular learner wants to go down. So you can see there on the left-hand side, you would register if it was bricklaying, it would be the 871135, and if it was plastering, the bottom one would be 871138. So they'd register on the 871130 as the core, and then one of the chosen occupational specialisms. So please do, when you do look at registration and you're a little bit way off that obviously yet, this is just giving you a bit of heads up, then make sure you kind of get the right component numbers. And as you can see, in terms of building services, you must register on the core, the 871030, and then depending on the occupational specialisms, whether you've gone for, as Mark said, for the individual occupational specialism or the combination of the occupational specialisms, again, you pick the relevant core component code there to register on. So in terms of industry placement, as you know, industry placement is a big feature of the T-levels. So it is about, you know, the learners spending time in the workplace, in a real working environment, making a hopefully meaningful contribution to that organisation that they're with. So with the, you know, for on-site in terms of the bricklaying company, then engaging in the bricklaying activity, and likewise if there was with a plumbing company, again having some input in terms of the plumbing activities that are carried out by that particular organisation, noting obviously their experience, etc. So it's typically 315 hours, say 45 working days of industry placement is required for T-level. So that's quite a big ask, but nevertheless, there has been a number of research papers done in the past which gives you tips and advice and guidance on how to perhaps approach that process. But clearly, as you all are as providers, are working very closely with employers. So hopefully you've got some good connections there and some employers who are willing to kind of take on a T-level learner and give them that industry placement. As I said, it is occupational specific. So, you know, if I'm on the programme and I want to go into paint and decorating, then I would be assigned in an industry placement for painter and decorating organisation. You wouldn't put me in a bricklaying one, for example, because my occupational specialism is paint and decorating in the example I've just given you. And the placement itself can be in a block, it could be day release, it could be a mixture of two. It really is quite open as how you want to kind of manage that process to best work with yourselves, and probably most importantly with the actual employer who's offering the industry placement to the T-level learner. So you've got a bit of flexibility with that. And then really just some kind of guidance on what the industry placement offer should look like, I guess. You know, what's a high quality industry placement. So it is about putting the learner in a position where they can practice some of the technical skills that they've developed while typically in college, but at the provider's premise with the provider. So obviously the industry placement is going to be the latter end of the T-level as such, by definition of that. It also gives the students some credibility in terms of the employers could see potential within them, and then maybe, just maybe, might think, well, actually, this is someone who perhaps wants to finish the T-level, that could then progress onto an accelerated apprenticeship, for example. So it opens up that potential opportunity. For the student, it's about, you know, improving and enabling them to gain confidence and be demonstrating competence. Now, a T-level is threshold competence, so we're not saying these guys who complete the T-level are competent, you know, bricklayers or painters. We're saying the threshold competence, the point of tipping into competence. In order to actually demonstrate they've tipped into competence, then, like I said, they will perhaps go on to an accelerated apprenticeship, typically just over 12 months, and then do an endpoint assessment in the kind of normal way. It also enables the employer an opportunity to develop, I suppose, that person's skills. And it's also about contributing, you know, from a business perspective to the workforce in general within the construction sector. So it has some benefits for the employer as well. So it's a two-way street. There's benefits for obviously the learner themselves in the placement, and there's benefits with the employer in actually engaging in the placement offer in the first place. It's also about it gives the student the opportunity to learn some kind of, I'll call it work-life skills, what actually goes on a, you know, in case of on-site in terms of a construction site. It gives them a bit of an introduction of that world, you know, because it's real life, and they know then therefore what they're kind of going to be working towards and going into in the future. So it helps give that kind of brief initial preparation, if you like, into going into that particular industry that they've chosen to progress into. But there's many benefits to the work placement from both the learner themselves, obviously you as a provider, because, you know, you want employers to support yourselves, and obviously from the employer's perspective as well. And then what there is a number of resources. So I'm not going to go through this list. You get the slides, but if you want to know more about how the industry placement can be supported, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of documents available and guidance and tips on how you might approach that. And you can see this a YouTube, you know, recording there as well, and some other kind of relevant information. So I'll let you, when you get your slide, you could perhaps, if you wish to explore those yourselves in your own time. So I'll now hand over to you, Rob.
Thanks a lot, Paul. We did get a bit of background noise, if you don't mind just muting a minute, Paul. So I'm going to start going through some of the support material. Before I do that, some of the links on these slides I have just dropped in the chat function, which you should be able to access. Obviously, a lot of information on that first section. If you've got any questions during today, there is a questions tab as well. You can type your questions in. Everybody is muted for the session because we get a lot of background, interference, etc. But feel free now or during the rest of the presentation to drop any questions in that chat. Sorry, in the questions tab, and we'll try and address them at the end of the session. So the main resource really to start looking at delivery is the Qualification Handbook. So this slide's just showing where the construction handbook is. So as you can see on there, as well as that, you've got assessment materials on the same link, just in the drop down box. But the course handbook basically is a specification of what you've got to deliver. And the reason we're highlighting that, this core, as Paul mentioned earlier, it's very different from the normal construction core and BSE core, you would normally find in, let's say, a VRQ type qualification, what we would normally deliver for maybe bricklaying or plumbing or a trade specific qualification. There's a lot more material in there with regards to the core, what we've not normally delivered. So, you know, nothing out of the scope of probably most tutors out there, but there's a lot of new information you need to probably embrace and look at to get used to delivery. So the qualification handbook link is in the chat, but as Paul said, it'll be on the recording, new slides, etc. when we follow up from today. All the slides and all these recordings are also on the T-Levels webpage if anybody wants to share them with any other members of staff as well, on the City and Guilds T-Level tab under the presentations section. So that's just where the handbook is for building services. As I said, the link is in the chat. Under the assessment materials tabs, you've also got sample assessments for each specialism. So this is just showing the construction one. I won't dwell too much on the BSE one because it's a similar format. And under there, we've got guidance, standard exemplification materials, which shows you what sort of a pass looks like in one of the trade areas, what a distinction looks like in the trade areas. There's sample assessments on there, sample assessments for the core, such as the exams, the employer set projects. They're all on the website, so it is really worth a good browse around, hopefully when you've got time within your relevant team areas. So if we just drop to the next slide, Paul. Apologies if there's sometimes a delay on the slides, it's when we're presenting remotely. So just to go back onto this core and why we're highlighting to look at the course handbook, as you can see, the core component on-site underpinning knowledge outcomes on the right of this slide, there's a lot of new information in there we potentially wouldn't see within a qualification. So building technology principles, built environment, construction science in quite detailed, construction design principles. So it's a case of we're going to be doing webinars around looking into this core in a bit more detail, but it's just to give you the heads up that there's a lot of new information in there. In each knowledge outcome, it tells you what the component is about. So you can see, you know, on the left of the slide there. So there's a lot of information in the handbook we wouldn't normally see, how it's linked to maths and English, you know, how it works across the various assessments, how things are assessed, how things are graded. We're going to go into some of that today, but really it's a case of you looking into that handbook and then developing your curriculums, etc., from the course content within the handbook. So that's the construction one. I'm not going to dwell on this one too much. We've already been through the specialisms. As you can see, the drop-down tab for assessment materials there again. The core is separate, as Paul said. We register on that one first. You've got to register on that before you pick your specialism. And then you can register the same day if you wish, as long as you've actually registered on the core before you register on the specialism. Our systems basically won't allow you to register on the specialism first. You've got to register on the core. So we make sure that doesn't get missed, because everybody, obviously that's a mandatory requirement. So then once you've registered on that, you'd choose one of the relevant options, which is there under the assessment materials tab, and you'd register your learner under that specialism. Course handbook link is there. So we're now going to look at how the course handbook is structured differently. So for the core knowledge outcomes for construction, there was 10 knowledge outcomes in the construction underpinning knowledge outcomes. As you can see, 11 to 14 on the right of this tab, there's actually 4 extra knowledge outcomes which are specific to BSE. So the first 10 are consistent from BSE to construction. They're the same outline content, but what I will emphasize on that, they have been amplified by specific consultants. So although the outline content is the same in those first 10, the content has been amplified, let's say, by a construction consultant in the construction handbook and a building services consultant in the building services handbook. So the actual content does differ slightly, although the overall content, the structure is relatively the same. That said, Different consultants will write assessments, different consultants will amplify the handbook, so you still have to teach that specifically to the BSE or construction candidate that you're dealing with. And because we've got those extra 4 outcomes in building services, what you'll actually see is there's a significant amount more guided learning hours for BSE, and I think that's something what maybe hasn't been addressed in some of the centres which have delivered this for the first year this year. They've maybe not committed more time to building services than construction. So it's just to give you a heads up, you know, make the comparison, but there is 4 more underpinning knowledge outcomes in BSE than there is construction. So potentially you might have to allocate more time for the core for the BSE candidates than you do for construction candidates. If we move on, please, Paul. So the qualification handbook has been structured slightly different to our normal handbooks for in City and Guilds. So as you can see there at the top left, we've got the learning outcome. So we've got health and safety. And then we've got the criteria. So this one is on construction legislation and regulations. Sorry, tongue-tied there. So the range provides detail under that. So if we're talking construction legislation and regulations, just on this example, it's where do we stop teaching, where do we start teaching? You know, we could go on potentially forever in that topic. So the range gives you an overview of what legislation and regulations you should be covering as part of that topic. But then we've got something new under that, which is the what do learners need to learn section. And that gives the primary purpose of the section. So what you've got to get across for that legislation. It provides context and the depth that you should be going into for that topic. So we've never seen that in a handbook before. You know, it's almost an explanation of what you've got to teach and the depth you've got to teach too. So again, why it should be a significant part of the preparation, reviewing the qualification handbook to make sure you're covering that scope, the range, and you're teaching it to that what do learners need to learn section, because that'll give it hopefully structure to prepare learners better for exams. And then we've got the skills box just there on the right hand side. That's relating to the core skills and general competencies. So as I said earlier, everything with regards to English, maths, any digital skills is all relevant to that skills box. And what I think is key in that, some of these will be almost linked to things like presentation skills and things like that, which is where you should be developing your learners in those relevant skills. So when they've got to do the presentation, for example, in the employer set project, they're prepared in that. You know, they've maybe been taught presentation skills as part of the delivery. So it's a very different delivery style to the normal VRQ delivery. If we move on, Paul. So we're just going to give an overview today of assessment methods for the core and the specialisms. Now, we'll be doing a lot more preparation on this. So we'll be doing curriculum planning webinars, we'll be looking at the core in more detail, and we'll be really delving down into the detail of these assessments and how to prepare learners for these assessments in some future webinars. But today's just to give you an overview of the whole, if you like, product, and then we'll be giving you more detailed guidance in future webinars. So if we look at the on-site first at the top of the slide, we can see there for the core, we've got an exam paper 1, 2 hours, exam paper 2, 2 hours. So they're externally set by us. So if anybody's delivered technicals, it's a very similar process. We write their exams. It's a set exam date, like a technical is. They have to attend on that date. They have to be registered for that exam series, and they have to sit that exam series. And as you can see on the right of that box there, they're externally marked. So basically, they come back to City and Guilds, and then our examiners mark the exams and allocate marks to those exams. So that's the exams in the core. Then we've got an employer set project. Now, for me, the title of that is a little bit misleading. These titles and structures, obviously, we have to go through guidance from IFA, people like that. That's something which we have to write in conjunction with employers. It's not something they carry out on site. So this employer set project is actually something which is delivered by the centre, is carried out in the centre, is actually all the recording forms are completed by the centre, and let's say the video evidence, things like that for the employer set project. You can see on there it's 17 hours, so a significant assessment. But then that again, the evidence is uploaded, sent back to us, and we mark that assessment. So for the core, we mark in all the assessment paperwork. You're uploading the evidence. You might be recording observation records, things like that, but it's actually sent into City and Guilds to be marked. The BSE paper and core assessments are very similar, so I'm not going to go over the same information again. As you can see, they're externally set, externally marked. Just to highlight though, because of the significantly extra content, the exams are actually 2.5 hours for paper 1 and 2.5 hours for paper 2. You get the same weighting, but as you can see, there's slightly more marks in the exams because they're a larger exam. But we'll be going into a lot more detail around that, how to prepare for employer set project in separate webinars, how to prepare for the exams, how to upload material, etc. There's a lot of guidance on that, which will be pointing you in the right direction of in future webinars. So if we move on, please. So we're going to look at this specialism assessment method now. So basically the specialisms are all assessed by an externally set assignment. So we write the assignment, you get that a number of weeks before. This year we've given centres a significant resource list to prepare for that externally set assignment, and then they'll be given the assignment a number of weeks before they can start putting learners through the assignment in a window of assessment before, again, that information is uploaded to us. The centre will allocate marks, but we will then moderate that. So again, a little bit like if anybody's delivered our technical qualifications, a very similar process. Comes into us, is moderated before the final grade is assigned to that assignment. And as you can see, each specialism in construction has just got one assignment. Quite a significant duration there, but with just one assignment for bricklaying, carpentry and joinery, painting and decorating, and plastering. So there's no exam, everything is assessed by the synoptic assignment for the occupational specialism. So that's construction. If we look at building services, these are the standalone specialisms. So Mark went through on the first few slides. You can choose either one standalone specialism or one paired specialism. So you've got there electrotech engineering, electrical and electronic equipment, protection systems, and gas engineering. Like the construction, each one has got one assignment. You complete that one assignment externally set by us and then comes to us and gets moderated. Slight different though for the paired specialisms. If we could just look at that on the next slide. The paired specialisms, we wanted to combine the assessment for these, but during discussions with IFE, it was identified we needed to keep these separate. So if you're doing a paired specialism, just be mindful, as you can see there, the hours of assessment is significantly more. You know, you've got a plumbing assignment basically at 21 hours, but then you've got a heating assignment at 20 hours. So the time frame for delivering that, etc., is significantly more than a standalone specialism. Similar format though, obviously externally set and externally moderated by us. Just another example there, heat and vent, externally set, but we've got two assignments. You've got a ventilation assignment and a heating assignment. So 20 hours of assessment you've got to facilitate. So you've got double the amount really of occupational specialism synoptic assignments to facilitate, because they'll have to be uploaded separately, the information, all the admin side of things. So that's just something, again, for building services, it's a little bit heavier on the actual occupational specialism assignments with regards to the synoptics for the paired specialisms. So we'll look at the next slide. Just going to run through a few resources now. If you haven't delivered T-levels before and it's quite new, personally, I think these Hodder books are really good. So we don't write the books anymore. Our bookshop's closed. So we've partnered with Hodder Education to write books for us, basically, to support T-level. So, you know, the revenue's nothing linked to. I'm not promoting this for any revenue interest. But when you look at these books, they do really lean to the new style of delivery. You know, there's little tasks in there, getting them to prepare for presentation, to research, little assessment tasks along the way where they might be getting them to analyze certain topics they've been away on research, to write reports on various things, present on various things. So it's really preparing them for that new style of core assessment and the model of assessment which we have to use. So that model of assessment for the core won't change every year. You know, it's the same every year. So when you look at those samples for the assignments for both the occupational specialisms and the core, the format where they have to research, write a report, and then actually carry out the employer set project, have the observation, the videos, etc., and then analyze how they've done on that project at the end, is going to be the same format every year. So you can see how some of these resources really support that method of delivery, really. If we look at some other information on resources on the next slide. So this is just a snip from the City and Guilds T-levels homepage, really. So you hover over the T-levels tab there at the top on the City and Guilds homepage, and this drop-down box comes under that, which you've got really the bits you want to be looking at are resources, where you'll see all the presentations, basically what we would normally call smart screen materials, is freely available on the website. So you just go into the on-site construction section and you'll get all your PowerPoints, your lesson plans for the core. I'll just, you know, it is only for the core. If you want resources for the pathways, a lot of the specialisms books which Hodder produced, there is mapping guides as to which parts of those books you need to teach for the occupational specialism. So let's just give an example of plumbing. The new plumbing book is actually mapped to the content of T-levels, so you know which areas to teach. But there's a lot of other resources on the web page. You know, there's curriculum planning stuff, there's the employer industry board information, and again there's a link on the slide there, but you can see just from the snip there what you've got to do to access that on the City and Guilds homepage. Events and webinars are also on there. Obviously you're on the call today, so you've hopefully found those, or they've come out through an advert. But if you want to view any past ones, so we've just done one which was an introduction previous to today, or you've missed one, or you might want to look at last year's for curriculum planning or anything like that, you just go onto the events and webinars tab there and you'll be able to view all past events like today which we've run. Okay, we'll move on. So that's it for today's presentation as such, but what we're just going to do now in the chat, I'm just going to drop a link to the survey in there because we want to know what you want from future events. So there should be a little tiny URL just gone into the chat, 1254. If you we'll just have a couple of minutes now, let attendees just complete that survey, as well as give opportunity to type any questions in the questions tab. And then we'll hopefully address those in a couple of minutes' time. Thanks, everybody. Okay, just while we're giving a couple of minutes just to hopefully get people to complete that survey, I'm just going to start and run through a few generic questions, hopefully, which might be useful for everybody. We've had a question about approval process. It's very similar to the normal approval process for the qualification, but the approval process is more detailed than you would normally find with the qualification. So you have to provide a lot more information. So we're going to be doing webinars on that, etc. But it might be worth talking to quality officers, etc., to start and get the ball rolling on that, and maybe get a look at the forms and the information you're going to need on that, and the submission dates, etc. Because like I said, they do ask for a little bit more information than we normally would for a, let's say, a VRQ approval for a qualification. So worth starting thinking about that. You will obviously need approval to deliver. But another question around quality assurance. Because things are marked by us and moderated by us, the qualification's not externally quality assured, so you don't get an EQA, an EV, as we used to call them. You will, though, during the approval process, get allocated a quality assurance member of staff, and that's really support for approval and to look at the approval process. Obviously, make sure you've got your facilities and resources and things like that in place, but as well as that, look at supporting centres through that approval process and getting them on the way with T-levels. So as well as these events, you know, the earlier you start your approval process, the earlier you'll get allocated a TQA, as they're called now, and you'll have a member of, you know, a person you can contact with regards to any queries on that process. We've had a quick question on, will we get a copy of the recording and certificate? Yes. So staff who have signed up and attended will get the recording and a CPD certificate from today. If you sign up to these events and maybe, you know, you're busy, you're teaching, whatever, you will still get the recording. So it's worth signing up to future events. You will still get the recording, not the CPD certificate. And then just something else regarding, with regards to days per week, you know, how have centres generally structured delivery? I have to say, talking to a lot of centres during last year, that is very different. You know, as Paul said, some centres are doing industry placement on block, some are doing it day release, like one day a week, maybe allocated to industry placement, and in centre maybe 3 or 4 days a week, depending on the hours they're doing per day, and depending really on the specialisms they're doing, and whether it's building services or on site, whether they have to maybe allocate more guided learning hours to some of the delivery programs. But there is obviously significantly more guided learning hours in T-level than there would be in the normal VRQ program. So it does need, you do really need to look at that curriculum planning, which is why we're doing separate events on curriculum planning. I can't see anything else in the question tabs at the moment. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to give it another minute. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for the next event. So if you wish, you'll be able to access the chat and sign up just while we're on now. Let's try and capture as many people as we possibly can. So we'll just give it a minute. Any more questions, drop it in the questions tab. And I'm just going to find the link to our event on our events page to put the link in for the next webinar for everybody. So I've just dropped the link in the chat there at 1301, and I'll just type in there. The next one is actually on the curriculum planning. So maybe if you have a look at the content of what we've gone through today, maybe have a look through the handbooks, maybe some of the resources, maybe have a look at the books. You might be able to get some good questions answered, or, you know, we can bounce things off other centres with regards to curriculum planning. And what we're also doing, as well as that, we're running, I think it's December then, the networks. So what networks are, if you go onto the events tab, in fact, I'll just put the link on just to the events tab as well. If you actually go onto our events page, which, to save everybody searching for this, I'm just going to put a link into the actual events and webinars tab from the City and Guilds website as well. This is where all the events are advertised, and you can sign up to all the events. As like I said, you will get a recording, apart from the networks, which they're on Teams, because we want people to be able to engage with each other and talk to each other a little bit more, obviously put themselves on screen. This is more about getting information across rather than getting centres talking. So as well as the webinars, we're doing network support sessions, which are actually on Teams, so centres can talk to each other and not just be presented to by City and Guilds. Okay, I'm not sure if there's anything else from Paul or Mark. I can't see any more questions in the tab.
Not from me. We've not had many questions on this session. I don't know if anybody's got any BSE questions or construction questions.
I can't see it at the moment. I think we have given enough opportunity for people to type in the questions tab. We'll give it another minute, and then if there's no questions, we'll close for today, give everybody 10-15 minutes back, and hopefully speak to everybody on the next session. No, can't see anything else coming through. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to download the links we've put in the chat. What we'll do, we'll say goodbye, but we'll leave the webinar open just for another 2 or 3 minutes in case anybody's wanting to cut and paste or use those links to join future webinars. We'll leave it open for a couple of minutes, but we'll say thanks a lot for today. Thanks for your time, and hopefully speak to you soon on future webinars. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye now. Bye.